I awoke into absolute darkness. I dropped to my hands and knees and felt the ground beneath me. I could hear the rustling of long field grass and felt the long blades weaving between my fingers. I desperately tried to survey the scene surrounding me as the wind rushed across the field where I found myself. Nothing but darkness slowly building my anxiety to a breaking point. I began panicked breaths and spun my head until a metallic creaking sound caught my attention. Glancing in the direction of the sound, I spotted in the distance a light on the horizon. With no other objects in my vision, I began to walk towards this one lone light. As I slowly got closer, I could see the light was situated at the top of a barn-like facility. Beside the barn was a rusted old wind pump that had been emanating the creaking sound across the field as it slowly turned in the breeze. The barn wood gradually unveiled itself to me as I approached it. The faint sound of gears and belts began to become audible over the rustling of the field. The barn was still a distance away when a peculiar smell struck my nostrils. It smelled like something was cooking, but not something I was familiar with. As I reached the barn, I felt along the boards in the dim light, trying to find a door. I called out, "Hello?" but only heard the machinery going about its unknown tasks. As I walked to the side of the building, I stepped into what seemed to be a stream of yellowy grease flowing down a shallow ditch that extended out behind the barn. Glancing up, I noticed that this barn had various conveyor belts running from inside out to 3 other outbuildings. There was one central building made of steel siding with an enormous chimney emerging from the roof. From the single window, I could see what seemed obviously to be the glow of a fire being stoked periodically. As I walked further into the operation, I passed beneath a conveyor belt that was several feet over my head. This passed from the steel building to the barn. As the belt left the steel building, I could see a liquid dripping that slowly dissipated as it moved towards the barn next to it. I couldn't see very clearly what was on the conveyor, but the impression I could make in the low light was that it was logs of firewood, or something like it. As I passed below, I could see another conveyor exiting the barn running perpendicular to the first one. It too was over my head. It ran to another building to the north. From that building, from what I could see, another conveyor ran out below an area sheltered with a tin roof, but no walls. I walked towards the steel-sided building to peer into the window. Inside, all I could see was an open flame surrounded with darkness. Occasionally, the flame appeared to stoke up, adding an extra glow. As I looked in, I suddenly could hear a squeaking wheel off to the left of me. Glancing over, I saw a dark figure pushing a wheelbarrow towards the low-lying conveyor that ran below the tin roof. As I tried to make out the figure, I jumped at a strange sound from the right of me. I heard a loud and distinctive splat, quite similar to someone dropping a pot of pasta on a tile floor. The object had fallen off the conveyor belt, leaving the steel building, and landed right beside me. As I drew nearer, in disbelief, I could make out a familiar shape. It was a human torso, with arms and legs missing, but head still attached. The body had landed on its side and then rolled on its back, revealing the steaming face of someone who had no doubt just been removed from a boiling pot. I turned in disgust, only to hear the squeaky wheels of the wheelbarrow coming in my direction. I quickly scrambled behind the steel building and watched from the shadows as the dark figure wheeled his wheelbarrow up to the torso. He reached down and laboriously picked up the torso and put it in his wheelbarrow with another splat. He made a sound that I assumed was some kind of swear word, and then stood there huffing and clearing phlegm from his throat that seemed to gather with every breath. He paused, glancing off towards the darkness beyond the barn. While he stood looking, his face was illuminated by the glow from the steel shed. In the glow, I could see his skin was loose and pasty. It looked as though his face was covered in raw chicken skin. His eyelids were swollen and nearly shut, and a hood covered his hair. He suddenly turned towards me. I was certain I was hidden in the darkness. but he began to stare in my direction. He took several deep and phlegmy breaths and then suddenly stopped. He just stood there for a minute, completely silent, maybe 4 feet away from me, staring into the darkness that hid me. The glow from the steel shed lit up again, revealing his clouded, pupilless eyes. He cleared his throat and said, "Hello, friend." I was sure he couldn't see me, so I didn't respond. He spoke again. "I see you there. You don't need to hide in the dark." I stepped out from the darkness. "There you are," he said. His voice raised from a gravelly husk to a whisper as he moved between words. There was a sound with every word that seemed like something was stuck in his throat. From a closer view, I could see his swollen face and discolored lips. His tongue was a dark gray and exited and entered his mouth every few seconds. "What brings you here, friend?" he asked. "I must be lost," I said. "That's okay. You've come to a good place." I paused and peered into his wheelbarrow. He glanced down as well. "My name is Boilie," he stated. "Boilie?" I asked. "My name is Eric." "Nice to meet you, Eric." Trying to avoid obviously staring, I snuck a few peeks at his face. In my mind, it looked for sure that he himself had been boiled, but I couldn't bring myself to ask. "Let me show you my operation," he proudly offered. Oh, okay. I was afraid to say no. "Just give me a second," he said as he wheeled the fallen torso over towards a deep pit beside the shed. He tipped the wheelbarrow into the pit and peeked down as the body slipped into the darkness. There was a wet thud as it reached the bottom. He turned back to me and took an excited breath when a weak groan emanating from the pit interrupted him before he could speak. He peered back into the pit and scanned for signs of life. He held his breath. Still nothing. He shrugged. "Oh well," and turned back in my direction. He threw open the door to the steel shed and flicked on the single bulb which hung in the center of the room. The light revealed a massive pot heated by a large gas burner. There was a very strong, stewy smell carried by steam across the room. "It all starts here," he stated. "We get them into the pot, and then you see those hooks there?" He gestures above the pot. "After they are boiled, those hooks pull them out and drop them on the first belt." He stepped outside and pointed at the conveyor going over to the barn. "Come this way." I followed him to the barn. He opened the door, which revealed another machine which hung over the conveyor. "This is where we salt them up." He followed the next conveyor belt to the next building. "Here I clear off the extra salt with a blower and then haul them off to dry." He wheeled his barrow over to the end of the line. He started to handle the assortment of arms, legs, and torsos that had reached the end of the conveyor. "Perfect," he proclaimed. He picked up a severed head with one hand and opened its eyes. Those eyes, too, were gray and foggy, much like his own. He nodded with approval. Looking good?" He ambitiously began to load his wheelbarrow with the boiled parts. Sheepishly, I asked him, "So I guess you're going to boil me now?" Boilie took a phlegmy breath and held it while he looked upon my face with confusion. He grabbed his stomach and began a very hearty chuckle. He stopped, hawked a phlegmy Luger, and then began to laugh again. He wiped spit from his mouth and then stated, "We don't just boil anybody here." He laughed again. "These people were poor folks with no family and no money to bury them with. Nobody cares what happens to them, so they end up here. I process them
and then a truck comes and takes them away. What happens next? I'm not really sure. Animal food? No. Too expensive for that. Maybe for people with expensive tastes. People with so much money that they want something no one else can get. I don't really know.
He hacked on a clump of snot, seemingly like he was gonna choke, until finally it came loose, and he vigorously launched it from his mouth to the ground, and then stomped it like a roach. In the distance, I could see the first glimmer of morning light. As if he felt the light like a bug crawling on his skin, Boilie removed his hood, revealing a head covered in thin patches of fine hairs. As he scratched his head, a clump of hair pulled free and drifted to the ground. With it fell one of his fingernails. He glanced in the direction where the sun will rise, his eyes squinting with yellow pussy tears. He wiped them away and continued on with his industry.